folks in the room, so I won't direct my attention over there. Thank you for coming. We had hoped for more, but we're glad that you were able to make it. We maybe can have some more substantive conversations with the three of you. Obviously, if more people come online, that'd be great too. So we are here today as one of our engagement events for phase 2 engagement for the Rutland Regional Plan, hopefully being adopted in 2026. So as part of this phase 2, we're doing several different events. This is one of our 2 feedback sessions. The second one will be October 30th of in next month. So with phase 2, we're really aimed at doing 2 things specifically. We are trying to gather feedback on the phase 1 and make sure that we heard you all right, that we're in the right direction. And really the second phase, which we're focusing on tonight, is getting your reaction to the draft policies. These are going to really charge the regional plan and form the sort of direction around our actions based on our goal. As a reminder for folks in the room, regional plan, just like town plans, are updated every 8 years. They're a mix of a visionary and regulatory document, and ours is really looking at coordinated community and economic development. Our vision for this plan is a collaborative guide that shapes a healthy, equitable, and resilient region. So those are our dominant themes that we're looking to weave throughout this plan. This plan has 10 chapters, and tonight we're going to go through each of the draft policies in those 10 chapters, along with the key takeaways from the phase 1 engagement that ran from January 1st through April of 2024. During that time, we heard a lot of really good information from the public. We reached more than 500 people in person. We've got more than 1,200 or almost 1,200 responses to our public survey. So we want to see that same rich feedback that we got in phase 1 in this second phase of engagement, which we're calling report back, because we're reporting back what we heard and how that is incorporated and influenced into the draft policies. So tonight you'll hear from each chapter author about their draft plan, specifically around the key takeaways and the draft policies. And there'll be some opportunity after each author goes through their plan or their draft policies to provide some feedback. And we'll do some whiteboarding around those policies. What did we get right? What may be missing? And just affirmation or confirmation that we're headed in the right direction. Just as a sort of reference to where we are, we just completed the first draft of the regional plan. We have several more drafts to go and one more large public engagement effort in early 2025. So more to come. This is really still the early stages where we're looking for input to guide those next chapter drafts. So with that, we're going to sort of kick off our night with our first chapter, which is sort of the baseline of the entire plan, and that is land use. And our planner, Logan Solomon, will be guiding us through his work on that.
Yeah, and I just noticed the camera is there. Should I be staying here so the camera can see me, or should I go up there? And
you can stay right there, since there's nobody else online.
Okay, great. Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for everyone to come out tonight, and for everyone in the recording as well for listening. The land use chapter is really at the nexus of a lot of all the other chapters we're going to be talking about tonight. In the land use chapter, we outline a vision for a vibrant, compact centers separated by rural countrysides. The chapter itself kind of starts big picture, talking about the land use patterns in the region, but really the focal point of the chapter is the regional future land use map. And that map is really a planning tool to encourage land use patterns to achieve specific characteristics and qualities that are important to the region. And that map really kind of outlines different areas of the region and then kind of talks about different ways we can encourage the specific outcomes we'd like to see in those districts. What we heard in phase one was a focus on our downtowns and our village centers. There is also a need to improve walkability within those areas and more broadly. And there's also a focus as well about preserving and conserving the region's natural landscape. And then as well as through that process, expanding trail networks in the region. Scroll down. And so really, our goal that was informed by that process, as well as the policies, is to maintain historic settlement patterns of compact villages or urban centers separated by rural countrysides. And each policy, that input was included, and it touches on different pieces of the goal. The first policy is about where we'd like to see growth and increasing infill development, redevelopment, and adaptive reuse of underutilized parcels within what's called planned growth areas, village areas, transition infill areas, enterprise areas. All of that, those specific capitalized terms, that's speaking to specific future land use districts. And more broadly, it's speaking to the downtowns and the village centers that we heard in phase one that we wanted to increase the development in those areas. Policy two is kind of the flip side of that, and it's stopping strip development and development of blocks of land that contain significant natural and agricultural resources, areas of high flood risk, comprise resource industries, and provide outdoor recreation and scenic beauty. What this is really saying is that we want to protect these areas that we heard in phase one that are so important to the region. And some of these specific terms, such as areas of high flood risk, are talked about more in their respective chapters. And this sort of gets at the idea that land use touches on a lot of the different chapters we'll go over tonight. The third policy is moving development outside these planned growth areas or village areas, outside of the downtowns and village centers, that if there's development there, that it should be clustered or otherwise designed to work with the landscape in terms of protection of ecologically sensitive areas and conservation of farmland and agricultural soils. This policy is an acknowledgement that while we want to focus growth in our downtowns and village centers, that there will be some development occurring outside those areas, and that it's important that there's clusters of those buildings to protect open space and significant resources. The fourth policy is about public investments and having most public investments be in these planned growth areas or village areas, again, the village centers or the downtowns, or in situations where there are already clusters of buildings. So for example, like a business park, for instance. But this is really saying that we want to prioritize our public investments in these areas to reinforce the characteristics we'd like to see. The fifth and final land use policy is ensuring that the scale, siting, design, and management of new development is orderly by respecting the character of the natural and built environment. This is really saying that different development should recognize the character of the area and just the broader context and fit within that context. With that, I'll take any questions or comments or feedback.
Yeah, so folks, before we jump into that, you'll notice the timer on the right side of the screen. That's just to be respectful of your and our time. We have 10 chapters to get through, so we're going to try to parse those out evenly. So let's jump right in. Does anyone have a comment or question, something they feel is missing?
Nothing missing. I just want a clarification on infill development.
Yeah. So infill development is essentially a vacant lot, and you have in an existing urban center, and so you might have a vacant lot, and you might have multiple buildings on both sides, and so this is saying building on that vacant lot and making use of those underutilized parcels. Yeah, great question.
I'll reserve, because I imagine that a lot of what other presentations are going to be about will tie into they have overlaps and similar correlational factors that we shared. So I'll wait until the end
Sure. Yeah. We have time now. If there's anything specific to land use, which is sort of at the nexus of all of our chapters,
Well,
but still, we're gonna have these policies specific to this chapter and the future land use map.
the one is that we loosened up our unified bylaws to allow for a greater than 35 foot because of the ladders on the trucks, where the criteria goes that any higher building would have to go through development review board and adhere to fire codes relative to that additional use. So you could vertically expand as opposed to being out. Because a lot of the properties south and north of town, West Pollitt, for example, and in Pollitt are protected under the land trust. So vertical growth is one consideration.
Yeah, I think that's totally relevant to land use, the need to grow up, not necessarily out.
But they did that in England with Queensland to protect the agriculture, and that's why a lot of that stuff grew that vertically.
As a sort of generality, do you folks feel like you support the direction of these policies so far in terms of land use? Any specific policies that you're like, yeah, that's good. That's really where we want to see land use go in Rutland County. Great.
I like the center and then these small cluster areas outside the center. I think that's great.
Awesome.
We already have cluster UBL,
Mhm.
For that potential.
Yeah, and part of this will certainly be, informing bylaws to achieve these policies and goals.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we can move on to our next chapter then, which is Logan again. This is housing, which I'm sure everyone feels like might be the hottest topic this planning season. So Logan, take it away for us.
Yeah, thanks for that. The housing chapter really, paints a picture of kind of what are the current housing conditions. And it really outlines a vision for a high quality, safe, diverse, affordable, conveniently located and energy efficient housing. There's different pieces. Each one of those has their own respective piece. But really it's talking about, current conditions of supply, demand, the broader market, how those are interacting, and existing programs and some challenges in meeting current need. And I'll also add that the Rutland Regional Planning Commission did a housing needs assessment for the region in 2023. So that assessment informed the current conditions as well. What we heard in phase one was that affordable housing and the lack of housing in the region is a significant issue. We also heard that there's a need to address homelessness and the lack of rental units, the need to restore old blighted housing stock. And we also heard frustrations regarding Act 250 and development restrictions in the state and how that affects housing need. So our goal, is those different pieces we mentioned, providing for high quality, diverse, safe, affordable, conveniently located, and energy efficient housing in the region. We heard bits and pieces about each one of those through our public engagement process, and each one of those pieces shows up in these policies. The first policy is, the housing growth in the region. So this plan says that we need more housing. And so what we're saying also is that growth of housing, as well as existing or new programs or any sort of housing incentives, that those should result in people spending no more than 30% of their income on housing and not more than 15% on transportation. The reason why the numbers 30 and 15 show up in this policy is it's standard guidance from the federal government in terms of affordability for these specific costs. The second, and one other thing I'll add is the 15% really, while transportation necessarily isn't the focus of housing, transportation costs there's a big impact that the location of your housing has on the overall cost. So if you have access to sidewalks and you can, and that access can get you to a job, it's a lot easier to afford things as opposed to if you can't. The second policy is promoting construction and renovation practices and universal design principles that result in high quality, energy efficient, and safe homes that meet the needs of all. Universal design principles is essentially saying that a home is accessible for all, regardless of anything, but most particularly their age. So that homes are designed so that people can actually age in place and not need to move because they're aging and they're going through a different phase in their life. The third policy is creating diverse homes with varying number of bedrooms at a price point affordable for households with varying incomes. The reason why we're calling out the diversity of housing is it's important for a healthy housing market to have a diversity of homes. So currently we have what I'd like to call a housing mismatch in the region, where most households have only one or two people, but most homes have 3 or more bedrooms. So there's a clear mismatch from supply and demand, but also in recognition that there's just a clear diversity in the number of people in a household and the amount of income people have. The fourth policy is locating housing growth primarily in planned growth in village areas. This speaks directly to the land use policies I just outlined and focusing our housing growth in our downtowns and village centers. And this also is speaking to not the alternative, which is strip development, which the land use chapter also speaks to wanting to avoid. That's it.
Great, thank you, Logan. Reactions to these policies? I see thumbs up. Any specific policy that really grabbed your attention, or any of the data referenced by Logan? In your experience in the region, do you feel as though this accurately depicts the current state of things and the future hopes?
I think it's important that you have the combination there of the income and the transportation. But it would seem to me that you would also then somehow, maybe it's in here somewhere, have to have industry if you're gonna walk. Like you're talking about sidewalks, and how do you get there?
Right.
I mean, this is my big issue anyway, is transportation. And yeah, that's great, but are we talking about building some kind of industry too along near these places?
So you're saying sort of those trip generators that would connect them directly with their employment. There has to be the employment.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that does speak, the idea of conveniently located, that sort of ability to get to A to B, and how that where your house is actually located really informs that process in part. But also, where's your end destination? Where's the employment, or where's the grocery store? That sort of thing.
Right. And is it going to be new, or is it going to be the same old place in town, in the village?
Right. Right.
So where are you going to put these houses?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
As I mentioned, maybe before some point in time, I kind of constructed a paper about this in a past obsession. Traveling out west and running into ghost towns, is that the housing and the saloon and the church and the school and all that stuff, they're all empty. And the reason why is because the silver mine had stopped producing. There was no export, which I was explaining a concept of a local gross product, an export product from that locality to drive employment. And if you look around Vermont, most of the housing that's constructed someplace around a waterfall where it was a mill,
right,
and then and expanded out that way organically. And so the need for manufacturing, retail doesn't support it, services don't support it, and having housing and people building the houses, unless they have more money flowing in, or an equal amount of money flowing into the community as is being spent to acquire goods and services from outside of the community. And then
Right. Can you speak to, kind of in that same vein, as a representative from Pollitt, what do the people of Pollitt want to see for housing being built? Is there
nothing much? They wanted to stay the same for the most part on the street. The the people that are living there in West Paula is different than Paula. West Paula is an affordable housing area. Paula is an extension of Dorset and the market pressures of that area, Manchester.
So you see a general reluctance for new housing. I'm curious, you folks in your own communities, do you feel that same sentiment, or is there really more pressure to see more housing?
Well, I live in Rutland City, so it's there.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely need more housing, but it's probably going to be refurbishing what's kind of already here unless there's vacant lots.
So does that sort of second policy really hit home for you about renovating the
Oh,
existing?
absolutely. Yeah,
buildings?
yeah, we need to, for sure.
How about you?
I'm here from the town, but I'm also here just for general information. But housing is certainly, I was at the hospital meeting last week talking about their strategic plan, and they are really looking for more housing, not only to attract workers, but so much of the burden that they are facing is unhoused folks, and that's driving healthcare costs. So, and it would fit into this convenient, high quality, safe.
Yeah. Let's say please 1 second, Frank. I just want to, Jim, we're talking housing chapter, and these are the draft policies for housing. I know Killington has some really intense housing market demands. Can you speak at all to
So
like?
Killington's issue is that I think we're through our third wave of people being priced out, I would call it.
Yeah.
It's not, prices for a 1-bedroom condo in Pico was $50,000, say 5 years ago. And they went to 90. So that group got kind of forced out from the 50. Now they're like 250, 280 for a 1-bedroom. Single family homes, you put a single family home built in the 70s for 1,500 to 1,800 square feet, you're talking $700,000-800,000. So a lot of the people that are working up there are priced out.
Are you concerned about the viability of residents being able to stay in your own town versus?
Yeah, and I think
second
we've
home?
shown that, Killington has shown that going back 2 years ago, prior to when we went for the TIP program. That one of the bigger ones in there is that we purchased a 70-acre lot as the town. And then we had Edmund Kessler Engineering do a study for us on this 70 acres before we bought it. But it's like 250 to 300 units that could be built there. A mixture of 1 and 2 bedrooms and like 15 1-bedrooms, 15 2-bedrooms in a single building. And then some duplexes and some single family homes in the 70-acre site. But we need to get the water down, which not everybody knows, but we know. We'll be going out to contract 5 probably in another 5 months to get the water from, say, Ravine Road down to this section. And then we'll be talking to the different agencies because we had to get water insight within 2 years before anyone would really talk to us. So Killington has done that, and then with the water line, I think we maybe is opening up some other areas. But as a select board member and then as a zoning administrator, I see a lot of people coming in looking at putting some long-term housing in.
Yeah. Well, I know this is an important issue, so if we have time at the end, we can circle back.
Yeah.
So let's keep forging ahead with, Frank, really quick.
One critical point that's true across the state, but I know a number of cases, including our state representative who had his own problem, where he had a rental and they burned through him without paying rent for a long time. Finally got him out and that place was trashed. And there's a woman downtown who has a 4-unit and one of the units was commercially occupied, but the residential unit, one of them was again, non-pay of rent, couldn't get him out. And she had decided she's not going to have that unit be for her long-term rental. She's going to do Airbnb with it because of that.
Mm-hmm. So your point is rental units staying in the marketplace due to sort of the regulatory environment around protections for landlords or tenants.
Yeah, landlords and tenant situation needs to be balanced out. Public radio did a thing on that a year or so ago. And it's really an education thing because the tenant and their associated groups are not really, they're thinking of the landlords being, making tons of money, and it's generally they make the money when they sell the units later down the road because of the costs. So this has to be something that's smoothed over because a new landlord buying a place has a mortgage on a place and has to have rental income to pay that and costs and
Understood.
and
Yeah.
taxes and all that stuff that's going up. So that's, that has to be addressed at the legislative level. However, a person with a state rep told me that when approaching a certain group of representatives from the Chittenden County area, that there was high resistance to balancing it out.
Well, thanks for that note. We're gonna move on, but we did capture that. And I think that is an important aspect to this conversation. Okay. Next up, we have Greg Helker McKee for economic development, which is another sort of cornerstone of this plan. Greg, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name's Greg. I'm the chapter lead for the economic development chapter. As you can see, I'm on Teams right now. I'm a bit sick and I'm keeping any germs safely far away from you. So the economic development chapter focuses on job and business growth in the region. And the state has set a broad goal for this chapter to show a plan that will provide for a strong and diverse regional economy. And this chapter will consist of current conditions and market analysis of the economy as it is today, and then conclude with trends that will shape the future of the region and policies and actions that will drive that future growth. So when we were doing outreach for this chapter, we heard very consistent things across the board, no matter where we were. And it comes down to a few key factors that people want to see in future economic development in the region. And the first being focusing future growth within downtown districts and village centers. So we've already touched on this a lot within the housing chapter, because this will relate closely to having job and business growth near pre-existing or new housing development, which would be within those existing urban centers. And this will prevent future sprawl, but also allow for business and job growth. Secondly, we heard that we're hoping to attract new businesses and employment opportunities that diversify the tax base. And I believe I heard someone say earlier that talking about ghost towns where once the export industry left, then it was unfeasible to, remain within the housing in that area. So by diversifying industry within the region, we can create a higher amount of export and bring new wealth into the region. Thirdly, looking at workforce development, which is focusing specifically on the job growth side of things, we heard consistently to train new workers, recruit new workers, and retain younger adults from the school systems. So there's a lot of different groups that are talked about in terms of workforce development in Vermont, but we heard very consistently that these two specific subgroups should be highly targeted as new opportunities for job growth. And finally, we saw again and again ask for strategies to increase and expand career opportunities within the trades and industrial manufacturing careers. So these careers tend to be related to goods production, and it comes back to, as I said earlier, careers that can bring new wealth into the region and export goods and services outside of the region. Next slide, please. So going off of that feedback that we got from phase one, our policies are essentially exactly the same as what we heard. We want to focus that future growth within downtown districts and village centers, attract new business and employment opportunities, to diversify the tax base, recruit new workers and retain younger adults, and expand industrial, manufacturing, and trade career opportunities. And to do this, we have spelled out actions that relate both to our internal programs and projects as an organization, but also since this regional plan is a visionary strategic plan for the entire region, we're also looking at broader strategies that go across everyone within the Rutland region. Does anyone have any questions related to the economic development?
Yeah, Frank.
One underutilized thing that we were looking at in Pollitt is that we have contractors and landscapers, et cetera, who aren't able to live in Manchester and stuff. And they're living in, but then when they buy a place, it's difficult for them to put in, without changing the character of the neighborhood, a site that's a commercial site in the rural residential, you know. But we have an industrial area, we own some property there, which could be converted into industrial park. And to develop that and to put in the water for the sprinklers and everything that you would need for attractive insurance rates, et cetera. And in fact, the industrial zone from Castleton all the way down to West Paul or Rupert is about 3 miles wide by about 30 miles. That's about 90 square miles. It's unutilized, could provide all the solar needs for the state going forward, as well as provide industrial park locations to attract ready-made, plug-and-play business locations to attract businesses in, which then would support residential development, would support economic development instead of trickle down across the board. Just that area should be looked at as a potential gold mine in the future relative to carbon and jobs, et cetera.
Yeah, I want to, you put a pin in that for when we get to the energy chapter, because it seems like a strong nexus there. Now, these policies may seem, a smaller, less than the other chapters so far, but they are weighty and there's a lot to these. Do you feel as though we're going in the right direction? What jobs do you all feel are really missing in the region? And is there any thoughts to sort of this priority of retaining youth in our workforce to stay in the region? What do folks think about those? Yeah.
I think you got like two different things going on here in the state right now, because like I had said, people being forced out because the state of Vermont is used to tourism, employment, and landscaping and those kinds. And they're the ones that are not able to afford the prices today. And the more that we bring in, let's say you go for higher tech jobs, is you're going to be forcing more people out of those areas or whatever. So as far as going like recruit new workers and retain the younger adults, you're going to need to bring in the jobs that are the higher value, because they can go, wherever they would like to go. I was just holding over here, and I got my daughter who was born and raised in Rutland, born in Rutland Hospital and raised in Killington. And she's in Utah in environmental science. And she's just like, I really like it out here, Dad. I think I'm going to stay here or whatever, because there's jobs that can, but for someone to come in, even on that pay scale, a lot of the places are just, it's like we are attracting a new group, and we want to attract a new group. But the attraction that we're bringing, a lot of them are working remote. Mm-hmm. I have my older daughter Megan, who's working from home, and it's not really taking care of some of the lower, I don't want to say lower, some of the entry level or landscaping and all this stuff. They just can't make it in a lot of these areas because they're getting, like I said, outpriced or whatever. The other part is that you start getting into this commercial or whatever, but Act 250. I mean, it's just, you know, I just read in the Rutland Herald today where a super Walmart wants to move in, but they're saying 2 years to go through Act 250. But yet that whole building was already zoned and occupied by a super Kmart or a super Sears or whatever.
So you see Act 250 as a limiting factor for job
Yeah, I
growth.
mean, it's at what point you have to keep on going back to Act 250 if the building is already there for a use that's been approved, and now the next company has to come in and go through the whole process.
Mhm.
That should be an easy one.
So I heard Jim say, entry level jobs, some of the trades. Do you two agree that those are the types of jobs that are needed?
I think you look for diversity and not just like you look in housing and everything else. We want the richness of people who are working remotely and somebody who can build.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pigeonhole it.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. I think we need jobs that are going to have a place for people to go to upscale. You start here and you move to there and you make more money. So what kind of jobs are those? And do we have the workforce, the educated workforce to do those kind of jobs? So, for example, call centers, which could be an attractive building. It doesn't have to be ugly. And it could be somewhere, and probably a lot of people are against that sort of thing, but you can put a lot of people to work in a nice, well-constructed call center, and eventually they get to move up the scale. My son is an executive vice president with Bank of America, and he started with MBNA in Maine in one of their call centers. I mean, that's what you need. You need the
opportunity for growth.
growth. That's why he doesn't live in Vermont,
Mhm.
which is sad.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The internet's a game changer. You can be a lot of places to run various types of employment locations. As far as manufacturing, you can do, if you set it up, you build it, they will come because they're looking for it. And if they want to live in Vermont, which a lot of people do, and you got to make it affordable. You got to have the green energy package. You got to have all the Fort housing affordability, all that stuff packaged so that it's going to be competitive. And a story on that is that I was once vice president and president of the Granville Area Chamber of Commerce. We made it overlap into Vermont, and I was on the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce. And Manchester was looking to expand, and there was something in the paper about Act 250 and years of potential legal fees and everything like this. And I said to the regular chamber members, I said, look, why don't we go down and talk to them? And we went down and talked to them. And within 9 months, the state of New York could come up with money. We provided there was a building site. They constructed it with the extension of the sewer and water for sprinkler, everything there, and the state gave them an additional $1 million. And literally within 9 months, it was running without the Act 250 issues. Okay. And the people who work, as far as housing was concerned in Granville, it was half the cost of living in Vermont state.
Okay.
Okay.
We do have to move on, but
Yep.
Craig, it sounds like you're saying much more intentional public investment potentially in allowing some of these industries and some of the regulatory issues as well.
If it's an attractive situation and all the bullets are met, then people will build and expand commercial operations, given the fact that they may want to live here too.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are going to move on to cultural resources, which is a little pivot from our really planning heavy, jargon heavy chapters so far. And Nick is going to take it away and walk us through what he's come up with so far.
Cool. Thanks, Stan. So the goal of the cultural resources chapter is to identify, protect, promote, and promote important historic, cultural, archaeological, and scenic features and resources. So in previous plans, this was actually called the Historical, Cultural, Archaeological, and Scenic Resources chapter. So we thought we would condense it a bit. And And within this chapter, we detail a path forward for preserving and enhancing our region's identity, which is deeply rooted in its historical, cultural, archaeological, and scenic resources. A lot of the engagement that we received in phase one, focused on the downtown districts, as well as water recreation sites, parks and trail systems. People also frequently mentioned that the natural landscape was something that they highly valued. There was a strong desire for more annual festivals, especially Pride festivals and centers. And lastly, people wanted to include certain historic or culturally significant topics in the school curriculum as a way of passing on our region's history. And that last one is something that we held on to pretty tightly in terms of, recognizing that the sum of these resources really is the heritage of our region, and looking at it through that lens in terms of, how do we protect these often physical assets in a way that protects a much deeper, soft power of our region's culture and heritage. Yes, thank you. So the policies we have are, one, to preserve and restore historic buildings. And I want to put a little asterisk here, is this seems very high level, and it is. So each of these policies is going to be accompanied with both actions and indicators of progress. So that's sort of the framework of how we'll build that out. So in something like preserve and restore historic buildings, there'll be potentially, programs around educating folks about what grants and tax credit programs exist that they can utilize to help preserve historic buildings in their downtown and village centers. As well as, try to shore up relationships with other organizations within the region and the state that have taken on this duty in a meaningful way, like the Historic Preservation or Department of Historic Preservation and the Preservation Trust of Vermont. So second policy is to strengthen the interorganizational relationships and volunteer capacity of historical societies in the region. So the story is it's actually kind of interesting. Some of the historical societies are walking on rainbows right now and have never done better, and then others are really feeling the pinch in terms of the core of their volunteer cohort are aging out, and there aren't new folks in the doorway ready to take their place. One of the really interesting upsides of COVID was that a lot of that older volunteer cohort did increase their technical capabilities. So that has helped quite a bit. And I think a lot of the relationships and volunteer capacity that we'd be looking to strengthen would be continuing that trend, helping folks get training in terms of inventorying and cataloging artifacts and stuff like that, getting folks more up to date on how to market events and organize events using digital tools and that sort of thing. Policy number 3 is recognizing arts and cultural as essential infrastructure for healthy, equitable, and resilient communities. So this echoes an effort from the Vermont Arts Council, who are looking to do similar work in ensuring that municipal plans do include a section on arts and culture, and making that part of the state statutes. But I think that we can get a jump start on it, and I think it helps to get people thinking in that holistic mind space of, when you're looking at how you're building or preserving a town, you do have to look at every facet of life within it and how those intersect. And that's what we hope to do with that. Policy number 4 is prioritize the identification and preservation of scenic resources. So especially in terms of our brand image for outsiders, the bucolic scenes of rolling pasture and a red farm and a silo is a lot of what people identify with our state and our region. And unfortunately, we haven't necessarily, if you read through the municipal plans within the Rutland region, there isn't a whole lot of uniformity in how planning commissions have approached identifying and cataloging and even protecting their scenic resources. And that's what this policy would aim to do, is sort of set up a framework for which any town can follow, so that we have some shared understanding and definition of this is what makes a scenic resource important, and here are some of the tools in the box that you can utilize to ensure that that scenic resource won't be infringed upon in any way. That's all.
Great. Reactions to this chapter. This one's a little bit more unique and really gets at the identity of the Rutland region.
I love it.
Yeah, I do too.
It is unusual. It's outside of what is stereotypically thought of as a planning domain. I walked past the Paramount today and I'm so excited about all of the new things that are happening there. And I love these pop-up heritage traditions that are included in this, like the Pride Festival or Whoopie Pie or the Halloween and parades. I wonder though, when you're talking about measurement and progress, this takes so much more creativity to actually measure and quantify.
Certainly.
And but I'm so thrilled that this is included, because I think it really does make it, it's the secret sauce that is so often.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it is.
So bravo. I was a little bit when we were talking about school curriculum, I'm just wondering about in terms of jurisdictions reaching. Maybe that's that intra-organizational relationship. I love the idea of having Rutland County heritage sites, not like a World Heritage Site that has some protection. I also wonder, this is an expensive place that sometimes people are not interested in financing because it's old, it's expensive to bring up to code, and they're looking at the new. And also things that are not tangible and impermanent. It's really hard to leverage support, but I'm thrilled beyond belief that it's in here.
Awesome. Thank you for that commentary. That's great. Anyone else? Jim, thoughts?
I think it's great and it's in it, but I've got to pick up where it's expensive. And then the gentleman over here is talking about, areas that's a gold mine to build on or whatever. And it's kind of like conflicting of exactly like what you had said, but this section is expensive to bring up. Then they go off to these other areas. So how do you regulate
The balance.
the balance to not to force people, but to open them up to do that there? And the only thing on here is the identification and preservation of scenic resources. When you start getting into any of these policies or actions, whatever you want to call them, what is the definition of it? Because if there's Mission Farm Church up in Killington, great location, great whatever. Going up the Killington Road has already been designated for this village or whatever, and you're being held up by 6 months because you got to look at some old sawmill that nobody even knew was there and nobody even goes to. So it's what is an historic really? Because when we start getting back to the Act 250 stuff, if you don't have it mapped out or a definition of what you're looking to preserve,
Right.
then it can go all the way down to something that you're really not looking to preserve.
Right.
And if there's not enough specificity, they won't know what you're talking about too as well. So if you're talking about scenic resources and it's really broad, that's just gonna be disregarded in Act 250 because it's not, there's no clarity there. There's
Right.
Yeah.
But then you can get an opposing for something
Right.
that you want to have as a growth. And I think when the milk farm down here, what was
Thomas.
it? Thomas Milk Farm and Dairy, and they had to go out or whatever, and it's some old building, you know, really nice or whatever. But they even wanted them to do off to like the solar, like this gentleman over here was talking about, but kind of got squashed because of. And I don't know if that's what something your group is looking to preserve, or would you rather move to the future in that site?
Yeah,
So if you don't have like really, you're giving ammunition, I think the wrong word to use these days, but ammunition to someone that may just not want to see any growth, even if it is bringing back.
Well, I think you kind of pointed to something important that really affects all these chapters in our work here, and that is, the RRPC itself is not going to be dictating. We are an amalgam of all of our towns, and we are nothing without them. So, in that part, I would really say that's where this plan needs to reflect those priorities of the community, because ultimately that's who we represent. So, spot on there in terms of making sure that's in line. We are over time, so I want to transition. This can be one of those that we'll circle back to, Frank, because transportation's a big behemoth of the chapter. I know you said you're looking forward to this one. Ethan, our transportation planner, is going to walk us through this next one.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot here, a lot of different modes to cover: planes, trains, automobiles, buses, e-bikes, pedestrians, and then some. So I'm going to go try to keep it moving, but if there's any questions that still arise, definitely bring that up. I'm happy to talk more after too if we run out of time. So phase one, we heard a lot of feedback around transportation. Sort of one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got is that driving and walking are both very highly rated modes in Rutland. Driving is really the primary mode when people are traveling around the region, but a lot of people walk around their local neighborhoods, around their communities, down their road, whether it's just walking to a local market or, just walking the dog just to get some exercise. Road maintenance was a consistent theme, not just maintenance of roads, but also sidewalks repeatedly came up. Concerns about ADA accessibility on sidewalks, older sidewalk networks that are not being maintained. We also heard around public transit. A lot of folks actually said it wasn't necessarily more service that would get them to ride. It was actually just better information, accessibility. A lot of people have trouble really even knowing where to access the bus and how to access it. So providing sort of better marketing materials was a consistent theme there. And while a lot of people said they felt safe, generally safe traveling on the roads, high speeds was a consistent concern that was raised there. So now we will go to the how that translated into our policies. And just to ground that, I want to sort of read the goal statement, and because all these policies are meant to reflect certain aspects of that goal statement. So the number one goal for the transportation chapter is providing for safe, convenient, economic, and energy efficient regional transportation system. And all these policies relate to one of those items in some way. So the first policy is increase the implementation of complete streets infrastructure on town and state roadways. Complete streets basically means that you consider all potential road users when designing a facility. So you consider often the land use context. Is this a downtown? Is there a sidewalk? We probably want to have a sidewalk in a downtown or a town center. Is this a rural road? There's probably not going to be a lot of people walking, so it's not worth investing in that infrastructure. Improve the resiliency of regional transportation systems for increased weather events. This is a big issue we've seen last year and this year. We're an old state that has a lot of developments and old roadways that are along waterways because often that's where the low-lying areas were. But that also leaves us vulnerable to threats when it comes to extreme weather, especially flooding. But there's also other weather events like extreme heat that we're vulnerable to when we have excess pavement. Increasing the development of infrastructure that supports transition to electric vehicles. It's a stated sort of goal of Vermont that electric vehicles are promoted to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So making sure people actually have the infrastructure that allows them to feel confident that they'll have a place to charge no matter where they go, because range anxiety is a big feature. So if we want folks to make that transition, we need to make sure they actually have the infrastructure, especially with multifamily homes, because there's very low adoption for folks in multifamily home because often they're not able to install chargers there because they don't own the property. Number 4 is ensure the provision of convenient and cost-effective public transit services that connect residential clusters with rail stations, employment, recreation, medical service, and shopping, which is a lot amount of words to basically say we want the transit to go where people want to go, and we want it to be cost effective. So serving clusters of development where people can essentially gather at a bus stop and then go to another cluster of development or somewhere else in town. Number 5 is apply principles of systemic safety to regional roadway systems. Basically, systemic safety is sort of a new approach to safety on our roads, which is proactive rather than reactive. Historically, generally, we just look and say, oh, there's a lot of accidents happening in this area. How can we address that safety issue? Whereas systemic safety is, say, looking at the entire safety and entire roadway system and say, what are the risk factors for accidents? How can we just start making safety improvements where there's the highest risk factors to try to prevent accidents from happening rather than reacting once the accidents have happened? Number 6 is protect airspace and runway clearance for Rutland Southern Vermont Regional Airport through local land use and town planning. The airport does have clearance and runway spaces and airspaces that need to be maintained for them to continue to operate and receive federal funding. So there's not a huge amount of threat from like high-rise development, for example, but there's certain things like wind and cell phone towers, which if sited in the wrong place could cause serious issues for our airport. So it's important to maintain that for that regional asset. Policy 7 is increasing passenger rail ridership and encouraging expansion of rail service in the region. State of Vermont is currently looking at adding a second Ethan Allen Express train. So looking at how we can support those efforts as well as rail in the region. Passenger 8 is increasing the share of regional freight tonnage that travels by rail. That ties into larger goals by the state to shift more of the freight mode to rail because it's a lot more energy efficient. That can take trucks off of our roadways. And policy 9 is increasing development within existing built up areas with multimodal infrastructure. So this kind of ties into a lot of the other chapters where we want to be sort of this, I guess, good feedback loop where we're putting more development into centers, which can then justify sidewalks and other infrastructure and also provide more tax revenue in a defined area so the infrastructure can be maintained to a better standard. So that was a lot. So welcome any thoughts, questions, first impressions, deep thoughts.
Why don't we start with you? I know this is a particular passion.
Right. Ethan and I have actually talked about this before, but my big problem with this, and it's not even mentioned in there, is the employment. The bus can't get people back and forth to work. Somehow they need more bus service. If you're gonna build all these places everywhere, you've got to have a way for people to get from point A to point B, and you can't do that now with the bus system that they have. So that to me is just a major thing. We expect, well, I work with the immigrants, so when they come, most of them don't have cars. So, and they're not going to. I mean, think of the cost of having cars. So somehow that has to be addressed, and it's not really in there. And I think that's important. But I also wanted to say, just very briefly, I think the paving job you're doing this year is amazing compared to what's been done in the past on Route 7 and whatever. And just the quality of the paving, who's ever doing it, I think it's great. But again, the employment and transportation is a real issue, I think.
With the transit piece, just wanted to dive into that a little bit. Are you speaking about the location or the time or both?
Time, mostly.
Time, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Killington is great because I think there's
Not
something.
great.
Well, but believe me, it's great compared to what we have in the city. And for people, I have a good friend who lives in Wallingford. She would love to take the bus back and forth. She can get here, but she can't get home because the bus stops ridiculously early. I don't know who in their right mind ever came up with that schedule. They do a great job. I appreciate them, but people do work past 4:30.
So Killington had that issue 5 years ago where the bus used to run all the time. And then the schedule got changed. And I think after 6 o'clock at night, the bus was no longer in the summer months going up the hill. And this is one thing, and don't take this wrong, anybody here, this is me, it's Jim Half, whatever, okay? But it's not always the state or the federal that has to help us get out of our own holes, okay? I drove for the bus to come back up on the hill at 8 o'clock at night and 11 o'clock at night because we had workers that could get up there to work at 4, but they could never get back.
Exactly.
And then the town of Killington worked with the local KPAA. And they got their local businesses to kick in some money and the town kicked in the rest. Well, fast forward 3 years later, the town is basically funding like a $25,000, $30,000 line item to have that because the town recognizes in order for our businesses to survive and for the people that can't, like, there's different levels of where people are gonna live, okay? That we needed to get the bus service to us. So, I mean, I'm one that sits and basically thinks a lot of times we go and we think it's the state or the federal to get us out. They're there to help us, but certain times we have to think out of the box ourselves as town reps or whatever. And, a $25,000 investment into the bus is nothing for a town of Killington. Now, it may be for others, so I'm not getting there or whatever, but, we have sales option tax on rooms, meals, alcohol, and they weren't getting the workers. So you have to go from there. But I would pick whichever one there is about the, building infrastructure for charging cars.
Mhm.
Okay, so my scare there is that you overbuild as technology is getting better in electronics. And you're building for where it's 200 miles of average. And probably within the next 3 to 5 years, these things are going to have 400 to 500 miles per charge. And so if you're building on today's technology out there of having a different, so many units, that now you may have wasted a resource place. Instead of building for today, think for building for the future.
Great.
Piggybacking on that is, I went to Green Your Fleet over in New Hampshire, goes every 2 years. It's at the Motor Speedway and at NASCAR and they have everything there, green, EVs, blah, blah. Every one of the guys that went around to these BMW and Mercedes, everybody, I said, what's the future of lithium ion? They says, compared to sodium ion. He says lithium ion is going to be history. Sodium ion is coming in hydrogen. And and one of the problems we had was we were trying to site up at the rail trail had maybe something and they had a mobile charging unit over there. And you can cite mobile charging because you talk about transportation. You're also talking about state parks and all this stuff with EV vehicles going there. And that's seasonal. So you have drop in, literally it doesn't have to be on the wheels. It could be dropped in on site for one season at all these parks and stuff all around the place, and then picked up and moved to your ski areas in the wintertime. So it's being used all the time, and to repair them, you don't have to send somebody there. You just come in with a new drop, pick up the other one, put it on the truck, drop it in place. So there's no cost. You have a contracting firm. B-Trans doesn't have to do this work. It's going to be somebody else with the education to do it. And that will solve that lithium ion.
So mobile EV chargers. Yep.
And then you can test out your usage of your
Did you
site.
have one
too,
other thing?
that way.
That's what I did.
Yep.
I know that the teen center is also very concerned about a misalignment of the bus with
Okay.
their needs.
I think that could be a whole nother discussion.
Oh, yeah,
The
yeah,
bus.
there is a whole other entity
Creating
that
that.
will work there.
Yeah.
Yep.
You said the teen center? There's a new teen center next to the Boys and Girls Club, and they're very eager to make use of that, but they're not necessarily, there's a safety issue, a fear at least for younger people traveling. That they also are not sure that the scheduling and the routes are.
Okay, so
good
kind of
fit.
back to that scheduling route structure.
So you want, just last one this year, you want to get into scheduling, the Amtrak or whatever, right? Amtrak coming in
It's the
from New
same
York
thing.
City or whatever. And you're trying to get people to come to the Rutland area and getting to, and the bus will not go to the Amtrak station after a certain time. So now you have people that are coming to the area to travel somewhere, and they end up getting into Amtrak, and now they have to go through the snow, the ice, the slush to the bus station, lugging their luggage or whatever, or their skis or whatever they're here for,
Yeah.
because the schedule of the train and the bus don't work together.
And
That's not us, but that's the two entities.
Yeah, so you have better connections to those other modes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We do have to move on. Thank you. Those were all really great. Next is, interestingly enough, is our enhanced energy chapter, where we may see a couple of these themes come through again. Our energy planner, Jeremy, is online and also not feeling well today. So Jeremy, thanks for making it. That's great dedication.
Hey everybody. I will try not to have a coughing fit while I'm talking, but I can't promise it. I might actually save one though, because there's so many policies in this chapter that I'll need to wake you all up halfway through it. And so that's my plan. So you can see this chapter is also an enhanced energy plan, which is a thing into itself. It's both an enhanced energy plan and a chapter within our regional plan. You can see the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, provide for renewable energy, and make efficient use of energy. And so that goal has two tracks within the function of the enhanced energy plan. The first one is a long-term plan aspect of the overall regional plan. The other piece that's a little more unique to this chapter is that there is a statutory function to the enhanced energy plan that provides substantial legal abilities for directing energy development in our region. And so you'll see in the policies that there's aspects that are speaking towards those statutory components and were devised to give us as much legal protection as possible. But before jumping to the policies, what we heard in our phase 1 outreach was that people are looking to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and start changing over to renewable energy options. People feel like it's important in our region to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Out of all the different types of technologies, there was a regional preference for solar energy development. Lots of people were concerned about the cost of energy and concerned about the climate impacts of energy use. And then among homeowners, the things people most want to do in their personal life is weatherization and addition of heat pumps to their houses. And then I wasn't kidding, there's 13 of them here, so everybody stay awake. We're gonna have a coughing fit. So because there's so many of these, I'm not going to explain each one in detail. I tried to write them in a way that I hope people could understand. There's the ones that have more specific terms of art or statutory gobbledygook, basically. I'll explain those in a little more detail. But if you have any questions about definitions on any of these, feel free to ask. So the first policy is to demonstrate regional leadership by implementing efficiency and fuel switching actions. And that's for the Rutland Regional Planning Commission specifically. The second policy is to promote the adoption of enhanced energy plans to all municipalities in the region, and then ensure that the regional enhanced energy plan is equitable. Then prevent forest fragmentation and preserve priority forest blocks in relation to energy development. The fifth one is to educate individuals and organizations about energy conservation. The sixth one is to increase building efficiency, climate resilience, and safety. And then the seventh one is to switch from fossil fuels to sustainable alternatives for heating, cooling, and transportation. We next move on to 8, which is to provide education about transportation, energy conservation, and combustion alternatives, meaning fuels that need to be burned to move our vehicles around. Then we have decreasing single occupancy vehicle trips. So how can we support people in the region to not have to drive alone for everything that they do? And then 10 is to maintain existing and develop new walking and biking infrastructure. And this is specifically related to a decrease of energy use. The recreational aspects of walking and biking are great, and I personally use them and support them. Within the energy plan, this is speaking more towards using walking and biking as an alternative to driving places. Then policies 11, 12, and 13, these are those statutory pieces. And so it discusses Act 250 and Section 248. So this chapter isn't commenting on the value of Act 250 or the value of the Section 248 process. This is just working within the legal framework as it exists to provide the region and the towns within the region the most legal ability possible. And so Act 250, it sounds like everybody knows about. Section 248 is the Public Utility Commission energy siting process for getting, say, wind or solar developments put in, or batteries needed. It's called a certificate of public good. So without getting into those details, it's just the legal process that our Public Utility Commission goes through, and this policy is designed to give us as much say as possible during those proceedings. And then the last one is to maximize the potential for renewable generation on preferred locations. One caveat to all of this is that most of these policies are statutory requirements in order for us to have our enhanced energy plan certified by the Public Service Department. So that's it. That was quick. And you all stayed awake. Good job.
And you kept your coughing down. Great job. Thoughts on this one? It's a meaty chapter, and like Jeremy said, it does have a regulatory mechanism baked within it.
I'll just come back to, once again, preferred locations. What's the definition of it? It's like,
Yeah, that's a hyper-specific regulatory term. It's basically, where do towns want to do renewable energy development? And so the Regional Planning Commission is not determining where those locations are. We're going to the towns and saying, hey, where do you want these things? And not all towns have preferred locations. It's only towns with enhanced energy plans. So this is basically creating the policy to help encourage that that's where the siting happens, is where the towns outline in their enhanced energy plans.
Very similar to the energy version of our future land use map. And frankly, they should interconnect quite well.
just like a group of people thought that on Route 7 was a preferred site, but it got shot down because of the farmland.
Correct.
That's why it's like,
It
what
could
is
have
a
been.
preferred
I'm not
site? Maybe the town wanted it. Keep on saying that the town may want it, but then you get to Act 250 that, or someone finds a little tiny boulevard beside of Act 252. So,
Yeah, with towns without enhanced energy plans, and Jeremy can speak to this better than I can, it really falls back to our regional plan. And as our regional committee who meets under our board of commissioners, we review applications for section 248 energy generation and transmission siting. So this is a important aspect of our commission's work here.
and single car rides, good luck with that. A couple can work two different directions. As far as making people biking and walking more, it's great. It's a great idea, and I can just tell you, like, for the town of Killington, Devon, what we're going to, like, we're putting in an 8-foot multi-use path, and guess what? I'm gonna tell you, we gotta go through all Act 250, even though it's a public road, and we're adding a sidewalk where, and even though it says if it's under 10 acres, but then they look at the whole project and you get slowed down. So we're looking to do more biking and walking paths. we're looking to put in more bus stop pullovers. Where Killington just has where the bus pulls over, like nobody knows where it's going, but up there, at least you wave your hand, the bus will pull over. But we're looking to put in this next plan of putting in bus stops and stuff. But we may get slowed down because of we're trying to do stuff that's in these plans.
Technology is advancing. One of the problems in our infrastructure is the wiring can't handle the loads. This summer, when June, we had that heat wave, there was a thing that came across public radio that says that the power companies are wanting people to cut back on their use of their air conditioners. Air conditioner is basically heat pump. Okay. And so when you have EV chargers plus on top of the air conditioners, but we don't have those, then we have an overload on the grid. It's would cost unfathomable amounts of money to replace. There's a company that's born out of MIT that's doing iron oxide, very cheap. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Who's heard of this? It's a battery system where it basically rust and it reverse rust and it control the charge. And they're building out locations on this deployment. And the idea is to have them spaced around so that the grids aren't absorbing it, but it's located so it's clustered to service. And it would provide 3-4 days worth of power in case of an outage, for example, which means that technology aspect of it is being solved with an inexpensive, environmentally friendly iron, it's not like lithium and so that's coming along. Sodium ion I mentioned before, which will actually work the battery out so that when you buy a car with a sodium ion battery, it will last the length beyond the length. The battery itself will last long beyond the length of the time of the car. The car will rust out, the frame will rust out before the battery is not usable. So you don't have the replacement factor, which changes the secondary market because people buying if you have to replace your lithium ion every 5 years and somebody trades, the next person buying it would have to pay that. And a lot of people in that market, and especially the third phase of that, is they're fixing up the bangers, and putting an exhaust system on it or something and wiring it together and driving it to work. So that $5,000 or more $7,000 cost of the lithium ion batteries is not sustainable.
So it sounds like you're kind of proposing a potential policy that really looks at emerging technologies.
Emergency technologies, and the final point is dovetails with Nick with the historic buildings which we're running into in Pollitt, which Jeremy and Jessica are ironing out with our program there with the MERC program, is that we have a historic building with a historic preservation trust. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes, where the emphasis should be when they're retrofitting historic buildings and working with a historic building, that there's an energy conservation component built into that.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Frank. All right. Well, we're going to move on once Steph's done with this note. Great comments on that particular one. Next, we have working lands. Barbara, take this one away.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. So this will be a couple of chapters here, working lands, and then the next one will be a lot less technical than what you've just gone through. So the working lands, the goal in statute is to encourage and strengthen agricultural and forest industries. To set the stage, we're starting the chapter with these statements. While the look of agriculture and forestry has changed significantly since the 1800s, these occupations remain an integral part of what makes our region what it is today. Without farming, we would not have open rolling fields or scenic ridges, or one of our more durable economic drivers. However, maintaining our working landscape and the occupations and businesses it supports is not a given. To keep it sustainable now and in the future, there are challenges to address. And since the decline of dairy farms in part addressing that, farmers in Rutland County are pivoting to produce a wide variety of crops and products now. So in phase one, what we heard, we were asked or we were told that there is a high demand for locally sourced foods, including farmers markets, community gardens, and community supported agriculture, CSAs. And a strong agricultural system in Vermont provides access to locally sourced foods and preserves farmland. So to carry that forward, we came up with 4 policies. The first one, stop the loss of farmland and forest land to development. Second, ensure that the working landscape, that's agriculture, forestry, and value-added production, is a strong asset for the region's economy. Third, ensure that the working landscape improves the health of residents. And fourth, enhance the health and diversity of the region's ecosystems to benefit local ag and forestry.
Thoughts on these policies? Feel like we're heading in the right direction? Yeah.
I insured a lot of farmers at one time, a lot of them gone out. Stood in many a milking parlor talking to the farmer, because that's the only time the farmer has to talk to you. And the cost per hundredweight of milk is about the same as it was 15, 20 years ago. It really is. It hasn't kept pace with inflation. They couldn't unionize because they got in debt, and the debt was paid out of the milk check. So if the milk wasn't delivered, and then repo comes and takes their stuff, right? So they couldn't afford to picket, strike, essentially, for higher pricing. And the middle then took advantage of that. Sad but true. And a lot of farmers weren't planning for continuation. Their properties were appraised for development, and the land trust came in, and that's ag, so that changed that factor for them and gave them some cash so the family farm could be continued. Otherwise, they were dying. They had this big bill to pay within 9 months to the IRS, and they didn't have it. So then everything got sliced up and sold.
So what does this mean for today?
Today, what we're looking at is a change. The big dairy, you have to be big to survive, and that's even marginal.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking at, go to your farmer's market. You have a lot of entrepreneurs there in the organic space or other who are need support. We have immigrants who have farming skills. So we're potentially looking at micro farming, where existing lots that are being growing up, etc., could be utilized for food. And they would typically not live on site, because that changes the scenario, but they could be living in your village centers in this other visualization for housing, and have the transportation to their farming location. And then you have to have the going to market. In the Rutland, the great thing about this railroad going from Burlington all the way down through, I was part of the meeting there and I mentioned it and they were excited about it. I don't know why nobody thought about it, is that's a direct pipeline that used to exist and was used to take dairy and farm goods and other goods to the bigger markets. And the train goes down every day. And so that can be utilized to reduce the cost of some of these organic farmers. I know one that's driving to New York City to sell the restaurants there. And I know some other ones that are doing this. So if you can build freight train cars to accept pods like they go into airplanes, where at the farms, they load up the pods and it's barcoded to go to a certain location, gets put on the train, then ends up FedEx or somebody went at the location down there, outside the city or in the city or wherever, can pick it up and take it off, and then within a day it's there.
Yep.
Okay, so that component has to be nailed down. So you got the farm, the housing, and the ability to sell into a market that's waiting for this branded Vermont organic food
Right.
to arrive there.
So a little bit more diversity in sending those products out. I just want to give folks a chance, especially around policy 1, because that's a pretty weighty statement. And I want to make sure, how do you guys feel about that?
I don't know how it works with everything else we just talked about.
In terms of balancing the housing, the development, the
Yeah.
business, all
Right.
those things? Yep, okay.
And energy.
And energy, right,
Yeah.
right. But
I mean, what is farming? So and it sounds like a stupid question, but like when, one of the folks that was running maybe 10 years ago up at, the ski resort, he said, I'm a farmer, I farm snow. No, because they move it around.
Well, I think that definition
No, but I
is
mean, like, so what-
changing
yeah,
a lot.
but like, so solar farm can be considered farming.
But specifically, like, preserving our farmland, our open pastures, is that something that's, we heard significant value in our outreach. Do you guys agree with that? That it's tied with sort of Nick's chapter on those scenic resources and that cultural heritage as well?
But I'm gonna get back to like, so with the way the weather is turning these days here and loss of crops from heat, loss of crops from, I mean, farming could be indoors in the next 15 to 20 years.
So
Hydroponic.
So farmland could be inside some factory that's hydroponic.
So it could look quite a bit.
So it could, it's like, so that's all, I keep on coming back to, what is the definition of what we're really saying?
You said you worked for USCRI. Do you see a strong?
No, I don't
connection?
work for them.
Oh, sorry.
Bridge to Rutland.
Bridge to Rutland. Oh, even better. Great.
Separate. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on this? And
No,
sort of-
I like the idea with the immigrants because they do have that background of some of them, and maybe they'd be interested in that. I thought with the farmland, I used to live on a farm in Wallingford, and
Mhm.
interestingly, it's a tree farm, so it's a little different. But we had a lot of pasture land that was cleared by a local farmer who had a dairy, and so he took the hay off the land, and it was sort of, you keep the land open, you get the hay. We didn't, it was an exchange sort of thing, which is great, except now they don't have any cows, and they don't want to cut the grass because they don't need it. So I guess what I'm thinking of is, okay, you look at this picture of a farm, it's great, but what is it doing? Is it just there to look nice? I mean, or some of it has to be used for development. I mean, it just has to be. And frankly, I don't think we want to, I love, the renewable energy, but I don't think we want fields and fields of those, whatever you call
Solar panels.
solar panels,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts?
I think the first one is lovely and aspirational, but I know farmers who are ready to cash in. Feel for them, just from an economic standpoint. I want to preserve it. I want, is there an incentive for them not to self-develop? Is there something we can do to compensate for that urge? So they don't have to be martyred.
Well, Frank, let's hold on to that for a minute because the next chapter is a perfect dovetail with working lands and some of these same themes we might be able to sort of talk about with the natural environment and preservation.
It covers a lot of territory though. So the goals here are to maintain and improve quality of natural resources and provide for wise and efficient use of natural and earth resources. So to set that up, retaining the rural character of our region is extremely important to our residents. In our survey for the regional plan in 2026, preserving our natural landscape and rural character was the second highest community priority after attracting new business and employment. At the core of our natural landscape and rural character are our extraordinary natural resources, which are also key to our economic, ecological, and physical well-being. Respondents to our survey also indicated that bodies of water are the most cherished of our natural resources, followed by forests and mountains. And the number one greatest strength and asset of the region was our natural resources. So this is great input, and it dovetails with the Regional Planning Commission's longstanding goal of safeguarding our natural and earth resources. So in addition, what we heard is protecting the natural landscape was one of the most important agreed upon topics. Water resources and forests are cherished, and improve accessibility for beginners and persons with disabilities to natural resource sites. Okay, only 9 policies here. Jeremy still has the record.
Lucky 13.
So policy number one, safeguard groundwater and other local drinking water sources to ensure they are safe for the public. 2, ensure that all surface waters in the Rutland region are of high quality, free of pollutants and toxins, and suitable for recreation and aquatic life. 3, attain no net loss of wetland acreage. In other words, keep it all. Number 4, increase the amount of protected shoreline buffers and riparian areas in the region. 5, maintain water quality to sustain existing aquatic communities and to ensure the natural diversity of aquatic species. Wide-ranging area here, natural resources. Policy 6, create a regional approach to maintaining and restoring the health of forest blocks, forest fragmentation, wildlife corridors, habitats, and biodiversity, and for conserving land in alignment with the Vermont Conservation Plan that you may have heard about, which will protect, conserve 30% of the state by 2030 and 50% by 2050. So the key here is that a regional approach is developed to address these. Policy 7, be proactive about local air quality during summer ozone and winter inversion episodes. And inversions help often occur in the winter. Wood smoke is a huge contributor to that. So be proactive by monitoring the state's data to address those at most risk, people with heart and lung diseases, including asthma, older adults, children, and people of lower socioeconomic status. 8, encourage the reduction of nighttime light levels to improve the health of residents and wildlife, and to promote dark sky astrotourism. That's kind of a new thing that's happening. And 9, promote safe and clean mineral extraction methods if appropriately managed and the public interest is clearly benefited.
All right. We got a wide variety there. Who wants to start? And what would you like to focus on?
Glad to see the protection of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yes. In a place with a lot of water, that's important for us, especially given some of the demands we have and some of the impacts we're already seeing.
Yeah, part of the chapter is the new problem with PFAS. And it's showing up in water, and it's not just like at one location, it's migrating through the groundwater system. And just no one's on top of that problem yet.
It seems like the places we find it are the places we test, and that's become a real problem for schools, particularly. Yeah, Frank.
One of the things that's kind of it is a consideration, but it's not front and center, is that there's water being a resource. There's states around us who are lacking water, Massachusetts being one of them, with their growth down there. And they were looking at one point in time, there was a concept where they were looking at Vermont to be able to harvest their water to pipe it down to Massachusetts. And there was in the ski area water withdrawal thing, I was working with Chris Killian and a whole bunch of people on environmental thing on the snow, the withdrawal from the small streams for snowmaking. And I gave a talk at the library up here. I got a standing ovation, believe it or not. And because I was representing all the interests. And one of the issues was that they were trying, the testimony the state was offering, had this hearing on allowing short-term permitting of allowing people to utilize water without being subject to the public trust doctrine that was applying there. Okay, to give them a free pass. Well, the question was how many free passes are going to be renewed going down the road, and the concept of these out-of-state interests getting these free passes to utilize this and have it renewed with the money being paid for it, right? Meant that the natural resources as a public trust was being compromised potentially with that move. And so a bunch of us testified against this and in different ways. And I won't go into my talk, but it covered all the bases and benefit everybody, including Killington building bigger ponds and engineering it instead of spending the money on law firms for trickle the water. Why not build bigger ponds and invest the money in engineering? So, but the deal is that out of state groups are eyeing our water, our resources.
Do you think that relation and impact to the Rutland region still exists today?
Yes, because water is a precious resource and it doesn't, and it's limited. And if you have population growth in a certain area and they can have their water systems contaminated for long-term, can't be used, then we become a prime candidate.
So protection against the sort of out migration of water resources.
Having resources being sold
Mhm.
when it's actually public trust or benefit of everybody in Vermont.
And it's more than public trust. I mean, I think the reason there's so many things in this chapter is that they are all related.
That's right.
So that, you start messing around with the water, you start messing around with biodiversity, you mess around with that, and you mess around with our scenic resources, and et cetera, and agriculture and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's definitely
Out west is a horrific story after story of mismanagement there relative to economic interests overruling public trust. And I think if we can support the public trust concept that is from the purity of it, we're better off in the long run.
Anyone else have thoughts on this chapter ranging from
They could buy all the PFAS where they want.
yeah.
I wish it worked that way.
You're on top of the problem now, right?
As far as I put $150,000 water system in my commercial building, and I know my neighbor put $250,000 water system in, and his neighbor put in a $500,000 water system. We're working on a water which is from a glacier form, whatever, to get off of it. But like what I'm hearing, I don't know if you stopped it, because out in Stockbridge there is unlimited water coming out of the glacial area, and it's trucked out of the state anyway for bottling water into different places. So this one here I'm lost, I believe in saving our rivers, our streams, or whatever, to keep them protected. We have no idea in Killington, and we've done the studies of how the PFAS had gotten into the water. Nobody knows. We, even every single one of us that own properties, was involved with Christie, I forget her name, was involved in doing testing and stuff from the state. And they tested the groundwater. They found it in the water, but they didn't find it at the levels that they thought they would in the ground.
Yeah.
So they don't know how it's getting in
That
there.
is a
But
real.
water is, you think of Las Vegas and Palm Springs. Where do they get their water from? From the states that say they have water shortages right now because these bigger places were built, and back then it was one. So I think it's a tough one.
So yeah, these PFAS are the forever chemicals too. Yeah. So that's another
bioaccumulating,
great.
never leave. Yeah, they're real and it's a serious problem. Okay, we're out of time on natural resources. Thank you, Barbara. Ooh, this one's mine. Okay. Public utilities and facilities. This really breaks down to the nuts and bolts of our built environment and ranges from anything from town offices to playgrounds and schools to wastewater facilities and the like. There are several goals because there are so many different components of this particular chapter. So I'll go through those quickly. Broaden access to educational and vocational training. Maintain and enhance recreational opportunities, plan for, finance, and provide efficient system of public facilities and services, and ensure availability for safe and affordable childcare. That's a big one. This chapter describes those current conditions based on the research and as well the public engagement. And we did hear some consistent feedback on those public utilities and facilities. This just captures a small bit of those because again, this subject is just so broad. But what we heard, affordable childcare is one of the most highly desired community facilities, especially in the wake of our universal childcare bill. This is going to be an important piece that fits in with housing and workforce, economic development, transportation. Extend and improve connections for hiking and biking trail networks in the region. I think we know we're really growing in that sphere. Some support for indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, more public safety, especially in our rural areas for police, EMS, and fire, more community events and gathering spaces such as a movie theater. I think that is a universal want in Rutland County. People feel there are limited options for community events and gathering spaces. I think that is improving, but it's not equal everywhere. And then finally, improve mental health and substance abuse resource facilities. It's a problem we're really grappling with in our region. Okay, so just under the radar for the number of policies, these are weighty, so we might even have to zoom in a little bit. I'll try to pound through them here, but policy 1, the scale and type of facilities and utilities shall support existing and future development consistent with the land use, with the future land use in this plan. This policy really relates to everything. And it's an attempt to really connect directly with our future land use map. So we're really focusing our investments and the types of facilities right fit for the communities that they're in. Water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities shall be expanded, upgraded, and maintained in an economically and environmentally sustainable manner. Again, in those areas designated in this plan. And that's really, again, focusing on those planned growth areas and where we want to add housing in the region. 3, municipal offices, garages, and libraries and all other public facilities should be constructed, maintained, and upgraded to serve the diverse needs of the community. As we all know, garages are pretty consistent. That's been about the same. However, municipal offices and libraries have changed dramatically. Those are some of our richest cultural community locations that have much more diverse programming and offerings than in the past. It's not just a library for books, and same with municipal buildings, they're not just for town business. Municipal shared services and resources should be considered to improve quality and reduce costs. This is a big one. The RPC has enabling language in our bylaws to establish shared service agreements, and this could be an answer to some of our rising rural costs. Sharing resources, sharing physicians and staffing could be a potential relief from that tax burden. Solid waste districts and transfer stations should be coordinated to reduce costs, reduce waste, and improve efficiency and sustainability. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Our waste streams are not changing, and it's a way for us to comply with some of these new laws like the Universal Recycling Bill. Policy 6, telecommunications infrastructure and service shall be expanded to unserved and underserved permanent residents while protecting scenic and natural resources. We all know broadband is being built out right now in the region. We are going to have really great wired internet connections throughout Rutland County by the end of this year. However, we still don't have very equitable or good cell phone service throughout the county. So that is something that should be considered, and we need to do a little bit better job there. The construction, maintenance, and marketing of recreational trails, parks, and water resources is encouraged for all user types. And I think the all user types is really the center of this policy and thinking about accessibility and working with groups like the folks in PICO, Vermont Adaptive, thank you, to really look at upgrading these facilities and making them more accessible. School construction, consolidation, and renovation should increase efficiency, reduce tax burdens, and improve equitable education. This one's especially important after Act 46, and seeing some of the new school budgets failing throughout the region and the state. Along those education lines, workforce programming and capacity shall be expanded in critical sectors like education, healthcare, and the trades, but certainly not limited to those. The regional network of childcare facilities and providers should be expanded to meet the current and future workforce needs in areas designated in this plan, similar as the ones above. Really, where are the workers? And we should build those facilities appropriately scaled. Lastly, access to healthcare, mental health, and recovery should be centered on advancing health equity in the region. There's a mouthful there, a lot of diverse policies. What do we think? Are we headed in the right direction? Some of you work closely in this realm, especially Jim.
So is 11 the one on the school?
11's.
Oh, 9 is school construction
Yes.
consolidation. My little joke on this here is I moved into Killington in 1997. My youngest daughter was 6 or 8 weeks old at the time. And that was right around when Act 60 came into place, 1998, I think it hit, 1997 was adopted. We had too many schools, we had too much staff per student or whatever, declining enrollment student. We're now in 2024. I sat 15 years on the way on the school board in Windsor, Woodstock School Board, 15 years. Luckily, my last 2 years, I'm not on it. But we still have the same amount of schools. We have less students and we have more staff. Okay. Government is saying that they have to think ahead. My daughter's 27 years old now. Okay. She was 6 or 8 weeks old when this thing first started. And now we're going to cure it in a year or two. I mean, hopefully the way that the state is going, that they want to go into hub schools for middle schools and high schools. I had many conversations with Dan French when he was the AOE executive director. And keeping elementary schools close into each town, because that's where you really need to have when you have children. I raised 3 daughters in this county. And you need to be close in the elementary side or whatever. When they go off to high school, it's not a big deal for a 20-minute or a 40-minute bus ride.
So more consolidation
So
of
it
high
needs
schools.
to be, and then you get back into where you're talking, because there are a lot of immigrants that are moving into our area or whatever. And like you said, friends or whatever. My daughter worked for a UCC, whatever, and she still works now for another company.
Right.
But there are a lot of kids that are coming in, and not all of them are going to go off to college. And I think college is getting changed that you don't have to, but more of the trade schools and everything.
Mhm.
So where there are these middle school, high school hubs, there should be like a Stafford with it.
Mhm.
And then when you go out to like Hartford or Heartland, I keep on forgetting which one, I think it's Heartland, has the same type of thing like Stafford there. And that's what we should be going to, is building these schools that are around these other type of trade school systems right there.
So pairing high schools with
In the high schools, and
centers.
I think that is part of their plan right now. It's just a matter of how long, and I have a lot of folks coming to me on the taxes that are being put out into our area. And I really say, like, if you could hang on for 3 or 4 years, I think maybe this time around they'll get this situation fixed. We look at school consolidation. How about supervisory unions? There are 53 or 57 supervisory unions in this state. Okay, it's a $1.8 billion business. Each one of those supervisory unions has a superintendent who is a CEO, and each one has a finance director, which is a CFO, and has a staff underneath them. You tell me how many $1.8 billion to $2 billion corporations in the world have 50-something CEOs and CFOs?
Yeah.
And I know prior to Act 46, the one that was before that, was to consolidate the superintendents, buildings and superintendent unions. But what they came up is to consolidate school boards, okay,
Right.
which are all volunteers.
Any other thoughts on the other elements before we move on? Really quick.
Just
The 46, if you listen to Vermont Edition today, there's a,
or
Act 60.
60, okay.
Yep.
if you listen to Vermont Edition today, there was a graduate student who's done a study on the savings or costs having to do with 46 and downstream effects. And you could probably play that again online. Very interesting. Those places that were able to save some money ended up taking the money and putting it into increasing staff salaries.
Yes.
But the network, the cell network, they might be able to build low power cell network, the cell towers off from the fiber expansion, because that's basically technically what's delivering bits around to ends up going out.
So like more of a micro cell grid.
Micro cell grids, less power.
Yeah.
Less concern there.
Less impacts on natural resources.
So Devin, I'm gonna jump you up to number 2,
Yep.
okay?
Okay, this is the last one.
Yeah, the wastewater or whatever, you're 100%. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure. Don't think we're putting in new, but there needs to be, and there needs to be upgrades to the waste.
I think Logan knows this. How much is deferred maintenance in the Rutland region for, do you know this off the top of your head? 200 million, 300 million?
I don't know the number.
Yeah, it's high. In Rutland City alone, I believe it's 125
So
million.
sitting on the select board and then sitting 15 years on the Woodstock board, you always try and you get beat up by people that don't want to do it. When you put something new in, you need to say that system is going to be around for 30 years. And you need to, from day one, start putting away X amount of money. And you need to have your capital plan. So I think maybe on number 2, like education of financial.
One of the action items under that is about capital improvement planning, actually.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
because
but
you're
it
right,
needs to be,
that's much needed.
we can all get free grants and then 30 years from now.
Yeah. All right, last but certainly not least, and probably one of the most important topics in this plan, and certainly an emerging issue, is climate resilience. Maggie, take us away.
Yeah, thank you, Devin, and thank you everyone for hanging in there. Think of me as the last checkpoint before the end of a marathon. So this chapter essentially looks at where we want to go as we adapt to and mitigate against climate change. Adaptation and mitigation being those 2 ingredients that build resilience. So in essence, this chapter is a vision for region-wide climate resilient community. And what we learned from our public engagement, a couple of broader themes that emerged. Many people do not feel the region is prepared for natural disasters. Kind of makes sense considering how often the state's been getting hit recently, and it just feels like sheer luck that we've been okay in 2024 for the most part. There were also calls for flood prevention infrastructure. So our infrastructure's ability to withstand or prevent flooding is not holding up well. And there's concern about, building up infrastructure that will be fit for the task. There are also concerns over changing winters negatively affecting winter recreation. We have Killington here, who I'm sure can speak to that. And lastly, the biggest concerns related to our changing climate in terms of impacts are flooding and not only high temperatures, but high temperature fluctuations, which is an important distinction to keep in mind. And actually, this aligns pretty well with what the science is saying in terms of what's going to be the most impactful to our region. It is going to be those more increased intense floods, and it is going to be not only heat waves, but also more cold days below zero as well, the fluctuation in there. So how this input helps shape our draft policies. How do we become better prepared against disasters? Well, the first thing you need to understand is what your vulnerabilities are. And then knowing those, building strategies to protect or remove those vulnerabilities and bolster your resilience. So that leads into policy 1, where we want to assist municipalities in understanding their vulnerabilities and strategies to bolster resilience. Policies number 2 and 3 relate to the point I just made about flooding and temperature fluctuations being the highest impacts. So policy number 2, preparing municipalities for longer duration, higher temperature heat waves. As we all know, Vermont is a colder climate. People are more acclimated to colder temperatures. And people in Vermont react a little sooner to heat-induced influences compared to other areas of the country. So wanting to get those mechanisms in place to make sure we all remain cool and safe is a priority. Number 3, implementing more natural systems-based projects that will help moderate the impacts of climate change. So this kind of goes back to the idea of natural systems type projects. And what I mean by that are projects that essentially utilize the function of the land. Those are typically the most effective in absorbing and moderating floodwaters. And there's a lot of locations throughout the region where we don't really have those projects in place, but they could be. So making that a priority would be something that would help us address kind of like the larger systemic problem there. And the last policy might seem a little strange: increase social cohesion to bolster community resilience during and after extreme weather events or disasters. So I'm going to point you back to the goal for this one, but the goal being encourage climate resilient communities, emphasis on communities. Research has shown that communities that do have strong social ties are able to be more coordinated and supportive in their response and recovery efforts. Kind of makes sense because you have those strong knit relationships already built in. So even just as simple as getting neighbors together every once in a while for some coffee to have discussions and kind of understand each other's views better, and building those homegrown kind of traditions and relationships. It'll be easier for the community to come together when something happens. I'm sure that we can speak to that based off of Irene and the flooding that happened last year and everything else. So, but yeah, that's the essence of the climate resilience chapter.
Some good stuff there, and very pointed at our current situation. Frank.
Necessity is the mother of invention. And Montpelier and Barry and all that mess has spawned apparently an effort at UVM that is apparently with a high amount of focus. That means maybe some money to build a modeling system for this type of thing, which I was mentioning this, Nick, to a toothache that developed relative to ag land and rail trail elevation and bridges and flooding impacting agricultural. And so this modeling, if it's happening at UVM, would be very interesting for the regional planning group to be intimate with, to be able to assist, because a picture of words, how many words? Okay, and if you can take a model of 3D geographical model and apply certain amounts of rainfall relative, and like pollen, Meadowy River Valley received 7 inches less rain from Irene than the spine of Killington up through in that eastern side of things. That band of clouds can drop the rain in, then you're talking about a whole different flooding scenario in pollen. I explained this to some of the people there, and they're like, but this modeling, when you're talking about showing on a screen, big screen, have a meeting, this is what it's going to look like if you have this, this, and this, and this, and it has happened only 50 miles away. If there was a shift, then people will wake up and can be. Well,
that's a great point, Frank. Absolutely. That model, I believe, is their pilot is of the Winooski, and we hope to see that down here too. Other thoughts on climate resilience, adaptation, mitigation? I know, Jim, you were very affected this.
Yeah, if you go back to the first screen. So many people do not feel the region is prepared for natural disasters. That's 100% correct. and that is one of the reasons why we're having like this type of immigration coming in, because it's for this climate immigration they call it. Because everyone thinks that Vermont is 100% safe. So people from California, Arizona, fires, they're coming here because, and we all believe that it is safe. And it's, you know, in 2011, we had Irene, and Killington upgraded our culvert system up in that area from the 25-year to the 50-year flood. Everyone thinks that's supposed to be like one every 50 years you have a chance. Every year it's 1 in 50 chances. So it's a 2% chance that you can have that, and it can happen every year. Then we had July 7th of 2023, which we were the only place that has this big cloud that Friday over us that wiped out and actually shut down Route 4. That was all from up above. That was the 50-year replacement. And now we're putting in for 100-year in this new one. But then when we go to FEMA, which is another agency out there, they will not upgrade you. It's on the town side to upgrade from the 50 to 100, okay? And we just feel that it is worth it because we're getting tired of, you know, getting $7 million worth of damage and have to covering 15 to 20% out of our town budget. So we want to be prepared. Hopefully 100-year is the correct one, but that is one of the things that's driving. So a lot of people come here because they believe we're very safe.
It's a very it's a very nuanced situation where looking at all of the broad measures of what determines climate resilience, which is a multitude of things such as you know, baseline conditions of society in addition to extreme weather impacts. I mean, we are 0 to 2% percentile but compared to the rest of the country.
Right.
But when you start kind of zooming in on some of these specific factors, like yes, Vermont is safe from fires for the most part, but we're going to have catastrophic flooding once every 10 years. Are we really safe in that aspect? It's like pick your poison, essentially.
Want to give you two an opportunity. Do you have anything on this one?
I like the awareness of this plan because it contrasts with the argument that some folks are putting out there that Vermont is trying to mitigate things that are not affecting them, that's affecting the rest of the nation, that they shouldn't be. So this is really allowing for the awareness that it is here too, and that we can't turn it back on.
That's great. Real quick.
2 points. Number one is there's a study out there that says the best place to be in Vermont, in the country, is to be basically to the west of Hardwick, Vermont, where the future. If you're living there, you can live there for a long time without having to move. So that's interesting.
That's where we put all the house.
But that's we're talking about the effects, but the cause is this energy conservation and the energy issue in Jeremy's picture. And our town representative has for a number of years been talking to the wall in Montpelier about setting up a Vermont State Bank. And the bankers don't want the competition. And I approached him with an idea. He delivered the concept to the state treasurer that he was meeting with. He gave him the information, apparently, is that you have a Vermont State Energy Bank. And you would have to qualify for, because all of this requires money, all this retrofit, all this green. It's impossible to think of the magnitude of the amount when you swim around with an IR camera to see the magnitude of it that needs to be done. How do you do that quickly? And how you pay for it? I said, well, what about a Vermont Energy Bank? And forget about the commercial loans, so you're not competing with the banking system, but you have the energy bank, and you fund it through grants or bonds, where Wall Street, anybody with a lot of money who wants to protect the money to give it off to maybe 10 generations down the way to protect their wealth. It's trusts and stuff. They do it now. But what you would do is you would basically have them be able to have some tax-free mechanisms to basically buy the bonds from the energy bank.
So really, we're talking about the public financing for some of this issue.
Where no credit scores are needed.
Yep. I hate to cut you off, but we are after 8 o'clock.
We're supposed to go till
7:30, I know. Thank you all for hanging in there.
Did you have to meet? No. Okay.
Please tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, we're doing this again on the 30th. Again, we can't thank you guys enough for coming and sharing.
30th of October.
Of October, thank
Yeah, we're
you,
not
sorry.
meeting in a couple of days.
Yeah, maybe I'm coming down with what they've got. But again, please, have a great evening and we really appreciate the input. Thank you all so much.
If you haven't heard of it already, the
Go to the
rutlandrpc.org/plan 2026 is the landing page for everything related to this.
Literally.
There's links to the survey that we have open right now. If you have additional thoughts after tonight's meeting and you'd like to take the survey and provide some thoughts.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
And we have some handouts in the back for QR codes for that survey. Feel free to take some. Thank you.
Just go to Inner Shelter and it's the concept.